I'll just introduce myself. I'm Peter Coles. I'm actually my background is in astrophysics, theoretical astrophysics, and I'm also the head of school for MPS, Mathematical and Physical Sciences. What I'm going to do here, I'm not sure it's what I'm supposed to do, but what I am going to do is to give a sort of a very personal view of the open access issue. Not so much personal, but personal to somebody who works in a very peculiar field like astrophysics, which is what I do. So I'm fully aware that you can't extrapolate from a field like astrophysics into everything else, but I'm just going to try and give you a view of what it's like from where I stand in this peculiar part of science. And I think, well, I hope that you'll find that we do things in quite a radical way, and at least some of the ways that we do science dissemination and publication might be of interest and might stimulate similar activities elsewhere. Well, I'll go on just through this. So the first issue to confront is why is open access important to me, and why is it important to people who work in my field? And there's a sort of moral answer to that, which I like to give, which is blue skies research, which basically is what we do. Astrophysics, cosmology is my particular field, the Big Bang and the origin of the universe. There's not much that's immediately commercially exploitable in that. Former astronomer royal, he's still the astronomer royal, Martin Rees once said that cosmologists were basically cultural ornaments. I don't consider myself to be very ornamental, but we are. I think we make a contribution to understanding our place in the universe, and there are spin-offs which are practically important, and very many of them actually, more than you'd think. But ultimately, most of our research is funded by the taxpayer, and my view is that the taxpayer is paying for it. The taxpayer should see everything that we produce, and they shouldn't have to pay again in order to access that. They've already paid for us to do it. So there's a moral answer, and I think we should share it. There's another issue here which is to do with public trust. I think the climatologists particularly have not done themselves a favour by failing to be as open as they might have been. It's actually led them to be accused, probably wrongly, but there's been a suspicion that they're hiding the data and doing something. So people who have a sort of ideological objection to global warming have had some ammunition as a result of scientists not being as open as perhaps they might have been. I think last summer with all the protests at Balcombe, I went and tried to say, I don't really know what's going on about fracking. Let me look in journals and find out what I can, what's the science case about whether methane gets into water because of fracking and so on. And there's virtually nothing you can find online unless you go through a paywall. And I think that's also very wrong. How is the public supposed to make decisions about things as important as energy supply and so on, when there's no scientifically credible information that they can access easily? I mean, we expect people to vote on issues and then we don't give them the information on which to make an informed decision. So I have no axe to grind about fracking, except that it's clearly an issue where there should be better informed scientific debate. And if that leads us to decide that we shouldn't do it, then we shouldn't do it. I don't want to get into the whole issue of energy supply and so on, as it was a big issue, but that specific matter is actually very symptomatic of the reason why science should be open, because we live in a society where scientific issues are important at an electoral level and other levels. I'll come back to this point here later, but I actually think open science actually leads to better science as well. And I've got a very topical illustration of that coming on. Actually, doing science in the open in a way which involves possibly even crowdsourcing and citizen science and so on actually allows us to do things that we couldn't have done even 20 years ago. And I think it facilitates new ways of actually carrying out research, not just disseminating the results of that research. I I actually, this seminar is about open access publication, and I've got some strong views on that, which I'll go through some of them at least as this little talk goes on. But I would say that actually, the more I've thought about it, the more I think that actually open access publication isn't enough in science. What we should be doing is totally open science, and that is just not just making the results of our research publicly available, but also, well, in my field, we deal with enormously large data sets, petabyte scale data sets in some cases. And it's all right to say, right, I'm going to make my data available on the web as well as my research paper, but in practice, nobody can do anything with data sets that large and that complex. So that's a fraud, really, is you're not allowing open science if you don't give people the tools as well. So people should publish that, in my view, not only their data and their results, but also the analysis tools that they use, the computer programs, all in open source format. That's what I think should be the model for open science. In my field of astrophysics, as I'll explain, most scientists, the vast majority, very few exceptions, are all in favour of open access publication. But there's a real resistance to the extreme model of open science that I've just kind of made. So that's where the battle is now being fought, I think. I had a poll on my blog, which is totally unscientific, of course, about it. And the community split 50-50 on the open source computing issue, for example. But my view is that if you take this argument seriously, that you should make the outputs of the research accessible to the people who paid for it, essentially. That's a crude way of putting it, but it's one way of putting it. Then it's not just enough to put the results out. You should allow anybody who wants to try to reproduce those results. Actually, reproducibility is a key thing in science. And that's the purpose of communicating scientific results. That we've done this, we got this result, here you go. Somebody else should go and do that and check that it's right. That's how science works in many cases. Okay. So, let me just skip over, and it's been mentioned before that actually astrophysics is a peculiar field because we've been doing open access for almost 25 years. The archive, I've got a screen grab of the archive. It didn't always look like this, but I've been using my first paper on the archive was in 1991, which is the year it started. The archive was run on an IBM 386 machine, a little PC, and it kept crashing, and it was quite frustrating. It didn't have the ability to upload graphics of big files or anything like that, but it was a model that has grown into the resource in my field. I never look at online academic journals or anything like that. I don't consult the library journals. I get all of my results from the archive. That is the resource for us. And you see all the different fields. Astrophysics is only at the top there on alphabetical grounds, I think. Don't say that to my colleagues in other fields, of course, but the astrophysics part of the archive has been around longer than many others. It covers high-energy physics, that's particle physics, nuclear physics, and all kinds of other things. Lots of theory stuff. There are, however, big areas that it doesn't cover. One of them is geophysics, and that's one of the reasons why there's no stuff about fracking or anything like that available. If there was a geophysics section, you'd be able to access everything free. This is totally free. The model that we use, obviously it is paid for, as you mentioned in your talk there. The total running costs of the archive for all these subjects is about $800,000 per year, and that's funded. If you count up the subscriptions worldwide to a single physics journal, that's a lot less than that. This costs a lot less than just one physics journal. So it's quite economic, but it's funded by a consortium of libraries and other things. And in fact, Sussex makes a contribution to the running costs, I think. In fact, if you go to the archive from the Sussex it will put a little thing in the top corner saying, we thank Sussex University for contributing to the running cost of the archive. I don't know how much they contribute, but it's a nice gesture. So the way that publications have always happened since 1991 in this is quite interesting and different from other fields. What we normally do is we get our paper, we submit it to an ordinary journal. There are several in this field, Astrophysical Journal. The British one has a rather archaic name called Monthly Notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. I publish most of them. I just love the name. It's so antiquated. You submit your thing there, and usually, at the same time, you put it on the archive. You don't wait for it to be peer-reviewed, in most cases. There are exceptions, but in most cases. It goes immediately in what I would call green open access there. If it's reviewed for the journal, and you have to put another version in, you update it on the archive as well. So for 25 years we've been doing this, basically joint publication simultaneously. So I think that qualifies as green open access. The running costs are, so it's the research tool, the bibliographic source for many fields, particle physics and astrophysics included. Now, the point is that if you think about this and you realise, I had a sort of eureka moment many years ago after I went to a departmental meeting, my former institute at Cardiff University, where I suddenly saw the costs of all the physics journals, especially the Institute of Physics bundle of physics journals. It's a publisher that likes to bundle one good journal with a whole load of other ones, and you have to pay for all the other ones in order to get the good one. And we had a lot of hearts searching to basically decide which journal subscriptions to cancel. And I went out of that meeting with a view, let's cancel all of them and just use the archive. Do we actually need journals? And the annoyance about this is that despite the clear evidence that the actual cost of publication and dissemination of the kind of research that we've done has decreased dramatically over the last, especially 10 years, as disk space has got very much cheaper and web servers are cheaper to run. The publications have increased in cost. They haven't come down. We were told years ago that it would get cheaper, and it's not getting cheaper. In real terms, the cost is going up at the same time as the actual cost is going down. So my conclusion with this was that we're being ripped off. And we're being ripped off kind of twice over, because we actually do all the work producing the papers. Journals then ask us to do all the work reviewing the papers, and then we have to buy back the things that we've produced and refereed. Essentially, that's the model. As a business model, you've got to admit it's superb. You can't fail. It's like having a cafe where everyone has to bring all their own bread and sandwich ingredients, make the sandwich themselves, hand it over, and then buy it back. So it's a bit. Now, actually, the private, the big companies are sort of, of the Elsevier's and so on, are easy targets when it comes to criticising this business plan and the fact that the costs also are so high and the profit margins are so high. I'd like to have a dig at the learned societies, actually. The Institute of Physics, for example, has palatial premises in Portland Place. I didn't intend that to be so alliterative, but it came out that way. And that's largely funded by profits from academic journals. Basically, most of the income, also the Royal Astronomical Society, gets most of its income not from member subscriptions or anything like that, but from the journal publishing business. So I'm actually a member of the council of the Royal Astronomical Society, and I keep raising this at council, and they say, well, we wouldn't be able to do all the good things that a learned society does without this income. And I say, fine, but it's not fair. Your income is coming from our library budgets. It's not transparent that money should be used for supporting bursaries for whatever the model is. We, as a department, Physics and Astronomy Department at Sussex, would probably subscribe to the Royal Astronomical Society in order to support those activities. But it's sneaky and dishonest to do it through this form. we think we're paying for the cost of disseminating academic publications, and we're not. That money's being siphoned off and used for lots of other things. So ultimately, I think that's really quite dishonest, and I think the pace of technological change is such that learned societies will have to rapidly rethink the way they do this, actually. I think they're going to be forced to do this. I should say also that you probably say new papers all go on the archive, but actually there's another wonderful thing, which is the NASA ADS. The ADS is the Astrophysics Data System. And this actually has, in some cases, rather large and clunky scans, but it has historical papers that go all the way back from now to the 19th century. So you can get those free as well through the Astrophysics Data System. So the legacy issue is quite an important one, I think. It's kind of, if we were designing academic publishing to start now, it would be quite easy. But we have to worry about what do you do with the back catalogue if you start doing open access publishing. And we do have that already with the ADS. So anyway, archive good, traditional publications bad. That's a summary so far. So the question I ask myself, why do we actually need these journals? Why? And that's why I suggested that we should just scrap all of them. So here are some questions. The first response to that question is normally, but you need the peer review. And the academic journals do peer review. And that way you can separate out the rubbish publications from the serious ones. And this process adds value that you wouldn't get if you just published yourself. Well, does it? There are plenty of horror stories of rubbish papers that have got through peer review. And there's some of them high-profile ones that have gone around just recently. But ultimately, the point is that peer review isn't done by the publishers. It's actually done by the same people that actually produce the research in the first place. And usually for free, at least in my field. When I do refereeing, it's just expected that I'll do it. I don't get a fee for doing it. So that, to use a nice Marxist phrase, the surplus value that's generated that is unpaid labour by the community itself. So, and ultimately, does it actually add value? I think not. What actually happens if you look at the very successful high-impact papers in my field is that they start to get referenced as soon as they go on the archive. And in an active field like cosmology, a good paper can get hundreds of citations in other papers in a year. So citations in this field are actually they measure something. Anyway, I'm not saying that everything about the quality of a paper can be measured in terms of its citation numbers, but there's certainly an indication of the reaction of the community to those things. So I would say the best thing to do is put the stuff out on the archive, and the community of researchers will itself pick out the ones which are worth reading and those that aren't. The good stuff will float to the top, and the other stuff will not get noticed. So the best form of peer review is actually to look at, if you're going to review a movie, you can listen to people reviewing it, or you can actually go and see how many people go and see it in the pictures. There are two different answers, of course. One might, a movie critic might have different criteria, but it's certainly an answer to how successful a movie is, how many people actually go through the door and look at it. Of course, there are issues with using citations. One is that, if a paper is published with errors in it, lots of people cite it, pointing out that there were errors in the paper by Coles 2003 or whatever. But those are actually small issues, I think. So, I think, and I'll give you an example of this in a minute, with a more radical publication model, I think we can break free of the idea that a publication is the end product of something. When it's peer reviewed, it's there and it's perfect and it's trusted and it's got the stamp of approval on it. Because I think that's rarely what actually happens. What we could look forward to with all the new technologies that's available is the whole scientific process being much more fluid, that you actually have much more interaction between the community of researchers and the literature. The literature will become much less static. when a paper is published in a more radical format, it could be accompanied by a commentary that's added to on a daily basis by people with reactions to it. And that refereeing process, therefore, goes out of a sort of control of the journal and actually is done by a whole community of people. And I think that's much more effective. Part of the reason for this is that Astrophysics has already led a number of projects in citizen science. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Galaxy Zoo. It's actually a very successful project in basically getting members of the general public to go on a website and look at images of galaxies and decide what type of galaxies there are. It's very difficult to get software to do that kind of thing. Human eyes are much better, and there's a lot of eyes out there, and basically volunteers do this. The project which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes is actually built on the back of Galaxy Zoo, and we use quite a lot of, in fact, their web designers supplied their expertise for free for the journal that I'm going to talk about. So I thought I'd mention that. Now, just to bring this, make this a bit topical, how many people are aware of what BICEP2 is? Did any? Well, it got onto Newsnight on, I think, Tuesday night. So there's not many of you watch Newsnight. I don't watch Newsnight because after Jeremy Paxman shaved his beard off, I don't watch it anymore. So this is a very interesting story in the lines of what I've been talking about. BICEP2 is an astrophysics experiment which is actually based at the South Pole, and it's intended to measure a very, very faint signal left over from the Big Bang. To cut a long story short, they got results recently. Last week, the group that runs it announced that there would be a press conference this Monday afternoon where they would announce a discovery. Last week I thought, this isn't really the right way to do it. Science by press release is never my favourite thing. Should go through the proper process of scrutiny and peer review. However, the moment the press conference started, the BICEP2 is the follow-up to BICEP1, in case you were wondering. It's not. It's a rare example of the sequel actually being better than the original one, or at least having more impact. So I'm not sure whether this will work. Have we got an internet connection? So basically, as soon as the press conference started, this site went live, and it's got all of the experiments papers that they produced, the raw data products, and some of the analysis tools. There are actually one or two bits that haven't been released, but basically it's nearly all there. Although so there's all this kind of stuff here, there's instructions on how you download some of the data, there's a lot of technical stuff here, but it all went live at 10:45 Eastern Standard Time when the press conference started. Immediately, I'll get rid of that. So that's the item from the BBC News. Can't really see BICEP, it's just basically like a big bucket down at the South Pole. So I won't go into the science so much, but in the morning of Monday, before the press conference started, somebody, I think it was a chap called Scott Dodelson in Chicago, set up a Facebook group, an open group on live discussion of the BICEP2 results. Almost 1,000 people joined, 853, most of them technical experts, but other people as well. And they immediately began dissecting the papers that had come out of here. There's been a lot of interaction between the BICEP2 team and the community on this. I wrote a blog post about it on Monday, pointing out some things that I thought were a bit fishy with the data. The blog hits went through the roof. I got more hits in a day than I normally get in a month, practically. And then I thought, what's going on here? This is totally different from anything else that's ever happened. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe this is the better way to do it than the traditional method. These results are now getting far more scrutiny and peer review than they would have done had they been seen by one or two people employed by a journal. It's being done out in the open, and it may well turn out. I actually have some suspicions that there's some questions about this signal. I think it's a fantastic experiment, I must say that. but there are some question marks about whether the interpretation of the data, which I think are shared by the team. It's a preliminary result, and it may go away. But I think this is more like what science is like than the model that is imposed on us by the publication, the traditional mechanisms of publication. There's a lot more to and fro, there's a lot more caveats, there's a lot more revision, there's a lot more uncertainty than this old model would suggest. And I think this is a better way. I've now come to the conclusion that actually they did it a really good way. Not sure about the press conference, because the press conference, they got everyone around the world, they told there was going to be live streaming across it, and of course the web server crashed immediately because they got too many people logging onto it. So that wasn't handled very well. So I think this could well be the future of what science is like in this field. I think it's really, really interesting. So anyway, I'm not sure how much time I've got left, Kitty.
I have another 3 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm on my last thing now. So I just want to say a little bit about a project called the Open Journal for Astrophysics. So when I finished this sort of meeting about library budgets and how expensive journals were, I went back and I thought, well, could we do something about this in astrophysics? And the idea was basically to satisfy all the arguments. All we need is basically the archive, a front end for the archive which allows community peer review. And we don't need journals at all, because once it's peer reviewed, you've got a stamp on it. So originally, the plan was to have a panel of peer reviewers who will review the same kind of people who referee for normal journals. And they would be able to review submissions to the archive and sort of put a green tick on the archive submission to say that it's been peer reviewed, and that would do it. However, in the light of subsequent thoughts about open science generally, I thought, no, that's not enough. What we should do is actually run kind of a journal where we actually have a full peer review system which includes this sort of dialogue component that I mentioned before. So the way it works is that people submit their papers to the archive, and our system, our website, basically takes picks the papers up from the archive and puts them through a peer review process. Now, you won't have time to see this all. I should say that the actual systems are shared between the Zooniverse people, the Galaxy Zoo people. They're the expert web designers, and physically it's hosted on servers that are run by GitHub. So there's capacity also there for us to store big programs and so on, so that fully open source thing. I'll just show you this. This probably won't work very well, and there's no sound on it. But this is an archive submission. It's actually an old one. It's a paper by myself and a PhD student, and that's what the archive submission of the paper looks like. By the way, you have different versions of it. You can probably see it's actually published in monthly notices as it happens. Now I'll just speed this along. So this chap here, Arthur, is it actually? I'm not sure it's going to work. Can't tell whether it's playing or not. Doesn't look like it's going to work. Let me just refresh it. Oh yeah. So this is basically a mock-up. You submit things. It's very slow connection here, unfortunately, so it's not going to be very good. I just wanted you to see the interface for the review process. Yeah, that's not going to work, I don't think. The slow connection. Oh, here we are. So there's the paper as it's imported into the journal system, and down here is the reviewer's part, and basically what happens is that the reviewer can open up a box and say, I don't like the title or something like that, and then there's a dialogue with the authors, and the reviewer, when the dialogue is finished, the reviewer can say it's now complete and so on. When the thing is published on the OJFA website, what will happen? This is not it's not playing, so it doesn't matter. The dialogue will be published as well. Then also, so you'll see the whole process of things being modified. This will be not anonymous. Reviewers will. I don't like anonymity. I think if you're going to be open, if you're going to decide that an important scientific paper should be published, you should be prepared to put your own credibility on that. And there'll also be on the OJFA website, there'll be a thing a little bit like Reddit, if you ever use Reddit, where people will be able to comment underneath and suggest other alterations. The other thing is that if we have a graph in the paper that's derived from some data, and suppose somebody reading the paper said, oh, I wonder what that graph would look like if the points from that part of the data were excluded, you can actually do that. So the graphs are actually connected to the data, so that you can actually remove some of the data and modify some of the data and replot the graphs on screen. So this is a lot more than most journals give you. So it's not just the sort of cheapo front end for the archive anymore. It's actually a much more radical view of the way the literature should work. It's too radical for the speed of the internet thing here. So there's an example of a dialog box. It's not going to work in real time, but you get the idea. So currently this is still being tested. We actually got some volunteers to submit papers to it so we could crash this. Basically the problem is this would be, there are people out there who want this to fail. And if we went online and it didn't work, there would be a lot of ammunition for those people to work against this kind of initiative. So we're testing it very carefully. It's taken a lot longer than we hoped. Largely because we've lost some of the effort. Arthur, in fact, who made this video, has now gone to work for GitHub. Used to work for OJ, for the Galaxy Zoo people. So, sorry that didn't work. But if you want to have a look at it online, you can copy that telephone number off the video link and do it there. But I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.